In a bold and unimaginable act that shook the Western Hemisphere, a notorious Mexican drug cartel, long known for their ruthless tactics on land, dared to test the full might of the United States Navy by attempting an attack on one of the most heavily defended war machines on the planet. The USS Gerald R. Ford, America's newest and most advanced aircraft carrier. This was no ordinary act of aggression. This was a suicidal move of arrogance, desperation, and miscalculated firepower that led to one of the swiftest, most overwhelming U.S. military responses in recent history. It all began when U.S. intelligence intercepted encrypted chatter suggesting that the Sinaloa cartel, having acquired sophisticated weaponry through a black market arms pipeline originating in Eastern Europe, had shifted from territorial drug warfare to something more sinister: maritime sabotage. These cartel members, emboldened by corrupt foreign advisors and radical ideology, plotted to target U.S. carrier groups stationed in the Pacific, believing that a symbolic strike could shake American dominance and demonstrate their global reach. But what they didn't understand, what they fatally underestimated, was the vigilance, precision, and sheer force projection of the U.S. Navy. As the Ford-class carrier sailed through strategic waters conducting joint exercises with Allied forces, including Japanese and Australian naval units, the cartel launched their unconventional attack. Disguised as a fleet of fishing vessels and high-speed skiffs, they approached the perimeter of the carrier's strike group just before dawn. Each boat carried RPGs, IEDs, and, in at least one case, a shoulder-fired anti-air missile. But the radar and sensor suite on board the USS Gerald R. Ford is unlike anything the world has ever seen. Its Slash Spy 6 radar system, combined with electronic warfare defenses, picked up anomalies well before they breached the outer boundary. Within seconds, the carrier group's destroyers and cruisers locked in on the targets. MH-60 or Seahawks lifted into the sky, circling above with thermal optics and side-mounted miniguns, scanning and relaying imagery to the Combat Information Center. When the first skiff ignored warnings and broke into the exclusion zone at speed, the U.S. response was immediate. A pair of F/A 18 Super Hornets scrambled off the deck with roaring afterburners, flying low and fast over the hostile boats in a warning pass that sent cartel operatives diving for cover. But the cartel pressed on, launching a series of RPGs wildly into the water, one even attempted to fire at a patrolling helicopter. That was the last straw. In a stunning show of force, the F divided by a -18S launched precision-guided bombs that vaporized the lead skiff. Simultaneously, a U.S. Arleigh Burke-class destroyer unleashed its phalanx CIWS system, turning the air into a wall of lead. Within minutes, the would-be attackers were reduced to twisted wreckage and flames. Survivors tried to retreat, but they were picked up by U.S. Navy SEALs who fast-roped into nearby boats from hovering helos, securing intel and capturing key cartel members for interrogation. What they uncovered sent shockwaves to the Pentagon. The cartel had been aided by rogue arms dealers with ties to international terrorist networks, hoping to use the attack as a testbed for maritime terrorism. But the failure of this operation sent an even louder message. Nobody attacks the United States military without consequence. In the following 48 hours, the U.S. launched coordinated strikes against cartel compounds deep in the Mexican jungle. UAVs, armed with Hellfire missiles, struck convoys and training sites, while JSOC teams executed precision raids to dismantle high-value targets. The message was clear. The seas, the skies, and the global balance of power still belong to America. Experts hailed the U.S. response as not only tactical brilliance, but a necessary deterrent in an age where non-state actors believe they can challenge sovereign powers. Military analysts noted that this was the first time a drug cartel had attempted a direct maritime assault on a U.S. carrier, a move that exposed their evolving ambitions and desperation. Yet, it also underscored America's unmatched capability to project force, defend its assets, and dominate any threat on earth or sea. The attempted attack also triggered a renewed military alliance focus across the Pacific Rim, with countries like South Korea and the Philippines ramping up maritime security cooperation with the U.S. Navy. Back home, Americans watched the footage released by the Department of Defense with awe and pride. The white trail of missiles streaking into a cartel boat, the thunder of jets launching off the carrier deck, and the resolve in the eyes of sailors and airmen who stood ready at a moment's notice. This wasn't just a victory over a cartel. It was a reaffirmation of American resolve. As the USS Gerald R. Ford continued its mission, unscathed and more determined than ever, one truth rang loud and clear across the globe. The United States does not tolerate threats against its warfighters, its ships, or its sovereignty. And those who try, no matter how unconventional or audacious, will meet the full force of American might. The failed attack now serves as a textbook case in asymmetric naval warfare, taught in military academies and war colleges. It's a reminder that in the chessboard of global security, even a pawn that steps on the battlefield with misplaced confidence can unleash the wrath of the king. The U.S. Navy doesn't blink. It doesn't hesitate. And above all, it never loses at sea. In the wake of this daring assault and swift retaliation, the U.S. military's top brass gathered for a classified debrief at the Pentagon to dissect every detail of the cartel's failed mission. What emerged was a clearer picture of how far these transnational criminal organizations were willing to go and how they were evolving beyond narcotics into militarized threats. The cartel's move had not just been a reckless gamble. It was a result of months of planning, foreign collaboration, and access to advanced weaponry previously believed to be out of their reach. Intelligence reports confirmed that former mercenaries and ex-special forces operatives from disbanded paramilitary groups had been contracted by the cartel to train its maritime militia. These foreign fighters introduced asymmetric naval tactics, drone reconnaissance, and guerrilla sea operations into the cartel's playbook. But while their plan seemed bold on paper, it collapsed under the sheer technological and strategic superiority of the U.S. Navy. As the intelligence community pored over captured digital devices and interrogation transcripts, they uncovered encrypted communications with Eastern European arms traffickers, signals intelligence pointing to covert deals in West Africa, and even connections to hostile regimes hoping to exploit chaos in the Americas to distract the United States. These revelations ignited a storm in Washington. Lawmakers demanded immediate enhancements to homeland maritime security and broader counter-cartel operations. Congress pushed through emergency defense funding to expand drone surveillance along coastal waters and accelerate deployment of littoral combat ships in drug trafficking hot zones. The Navy increased patrols in the eastern Pacific and Gulf of Mexico, while the Coast Guard mobilized its maritime security response teams, MSRT, in key ports. Meanwhile, the attack elevated the role of carrier strike groups in deterring non-state actors. The Gerald R. Ford, already a symbol of American naval dominance, now became an operational deterrent not just against hostile nations, but rogue elements thinking beyond traditional warfare. Public sentiment in the U.S. was a mix of outrage and pride. Veterans groups, military families, and citizens alike rallied behind the Navy, flooding social media with messages of support, #DefendTheFleet trending across platforms. Footage of the carrier's readiness, jets lined up under sunrise, sailors conducting high-tempo drills, and radar screens lit with precision, was broadcast nationwide. The Navy, leveraging this attention, released recruitment ads emphasizing strength, honor, and vigilance. Young Americans, inspired by the real-time heroism they had witnessed, flocked to enlistment centers. And across the globe, adversaries of the U.S. took notice. Analysts in Beijing, Tehran, and Moscow examined the speed and decisiveness of the American response. If a drug cartel could provoke such fury, what might a direct military threat invite? Simultaneously, the diplomatic implications were unfolding rapidly. U.S. ambassadors met with allies in Mexico City to demand stronger joint action against cartels and identify how such a large-scale plot could fester without intervention. The Mexican government, facing international pressure and internal embarrassment, pledged full cooperation. Joint task forces were set up to raid cartel arsenals, track financial networks, and root out complicit officials. At the same time, multinational military exercises were restructured to include non-state maritime threat scenarios, carrier defense against unconventional attackers now becoming a new priority in naval war games. As the Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group resumed operations with an even more heightened state of alert, the lessons of this encounter began to echo across the halls of defense ministries around the world. The age of warfare was shifting, and America had just sent a thunderous message. Anyone, be it nation, network, or narco, who dare to bring war to its waters would face consequences too devastating to imagine. This new precedent marked a pivotal moment in U.S. military doctrine. War was no longer just fought on battlefields or in airspace dominated by stealth jets and long-range missiles. It had come to the domain of criminal insurgents, who now flirted with strategies once reserved for guerrilla forces and proxy armies. The military began drafting new doctrines to address hybrid threats at sea, with new policies blending counterterrorism strategies with maritime defense. Advanced war games tested scenarios of swarming attacks by unconventional craft, simulating everything from drone-infested fishing fleets to kamikaze speedboats. Technologies were upgraded. Too, lasers, EMP defenses, and artificial intelligence-assisted targeting systems were accelerated for fleet-wide implementation. And all the while, the spirit of the American sailor and aviator stood tall, undaunted by the past, unafraid of what lies ahead. The cartel's mistake had become a chapter in military legend, a cautionary tale of hubris clashing with unrelenting power. And as stars and stripes fluttered high above the deck of the Ford, now christened the memory of that battle, one truth endured. America's enemies may change their faces and tactics, but the response remains the same, swift, overwhelming, and absolute. As the dust began to settle from the initial shockwaves of the brazen attack by the Mexican cartel, the U.S. Navy knew it was time to send a message that would echo through history and leave no room for misinterpretation. The waters churned as carrier strike groups rapidly repositioned, intelligence satellites refocused their gaze, and combat air patrols intensified. The USS Gerald R. Ford, a floating fortress and the pride of the U.S. Navy, was now the center of the world's attention, not only because it had narrowly escaped a high-stakes ambush, but because of how it was about to respond. Within hours, Task Force 218 was mobilized, consisting of destroyers, cruisers, and support vessels all working in synchronized precision around the aircraft carrier. The mission: neutralize cartel naval assets, cripple their infrastructure, and showcase the unmatched wrath of U.S. sea power. While the world speculated and the media scrambled, the Ford's deck buzzed with relentless motion. F/A 18 Super Hornets launched in pairs, their engines screaming through the skies in deafening roars, conducting combat air patrols and surgical strikes across cartel maritime routes. 2D Advanced Hawkeyes maintained airspace command, locking onto fast-moving vessels and relaying real-time data back to carrier command. On the ground, cartel operatives scrambled, their attempts to retreat hampered by targeted bombardments from Tomahawk missiles launched with terrifying precision from nearby destroyers. A stealthy force of Navy SEALs, embedded with intelligence teams and equipped with the most advanced gear available, launched covert nighttime raids on cartel strongholds, dismantling command centers and capturing high-value targets. Meanwhile, electronic warfare specialists aboard the carrier deployed jamming systems to disable communications between cartel speedboats and drone operators, rendering their equipment useless and leaving them exposed. The show of force was not just physical. It was psychological. Fighter jets flew low over cartel-held territory, their afterburners lighting up the night sky like a warning flare from the heavens. Gunships like the AC-130 Spectre orbit above, delivering pinpoint devastation that paralyzed cartel movement and morale. At sea, USS Ford's close-in weapon systems remained on high alert, swatting away any low-level threats like gnats before they could draw close. It became clear to the world and to the enemy that attacking a U.S. carrier was not only a tactical failure, but a strategic disaster. The Navy's retribution was fast, focused, and devastating, and it sent a chilling reminder that American naval supremacy was not to be challenged. Across Pentagon briefing rooms, global intelligence hubs, and allied military commands, the U.S. response was studied, admired, and recorded as a masterclass in modern naval warfare. Yet, the most powerful image came when Ford sailed past the remains of destroyed cartel fleet, its flag flying proud, jets lying on deck, as if daring anyone else to even try. The message was loud and clear. America's might does not tolerate threats. It eliminates them. The failed cartel attack, intended to send shockwaves through global power dynamics, instead became the ultimate warning to adversaries around the world. The United States Navy will always be ready, and when provoked, it does not merely respond. It dominates. But the situation didn't cool down from there. What followed was an all-hands-on-deck effort by the U.S. Navy, Marine Corps, and intelligence agencies to ensure that a message was sent. Don't even think about touching a U.S. carrier. The USS Gerald R. Ford, at the center of this crisis, was quickly repositioned and surrounded by a tactical shield of Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and other support vessels to form an impenetrable protective ring. At the same time, F/A-18 Super Hornets were launched in rotation around the clock to establish total air superiority over the region. Drones, satellites, and reconnaissance aircraft like the P-8 Poseidon scoured the area for additional cartel assets that might pose a threat. Meanwhile, U.S. Cyber Command launched a digital blitz, targeting cartel communications, financial systems, and encrypted networks in a silent war of suppression that saw cartel operations begin to buckle under invisible pressure. But the real statement came when the U.S. authorized precision retaliatory strikes. A flight of F-35C Lightning II fighters, operating off the deck of the Ford, took off in formation, joined by EA-18G Growlers for electronic warfare support. At the same time, B-2 Spirit stealth bombers were airborne from Whiteman Air Force Base, heading south with one mission: eliminate the threat surgically. Within hours, specific cartel compounds, weapons caches, and clandestine launch pads near the coast, linked to the attack via intelligence, were turned into smoldering craters. There was no room for ambiguity. The United States had responded not just with force, but with overwhelming precision, sending a message that the might of its naval power and global strike capability was as real as ever. International reactions followed swiftly. Allies such as the United Kingdom, Japan, and Australia voiced their support, citing the sanctity of international waters and the right of a nation to defend its assets. Meanwhile, nations in the region were urged to clamp down on the cartel's transnational operations, as U.S. diplomats engaged in high-level talks to solidify regional cooperation. The cartels, rattled by the unprecedented response, quickly began to fracture. Internal communication leaks revealed paranoia and panic among leadership ranks. Several mid-level commanders defected or disappeared altogether, unwilling to be part of what was now a marked and hunted network. U.S. Special Operations Forces were quietly deployed across strategic points in Central and South America, coordinated with partner forces to take down remaining cartel infrastructure. And the message to every non-state actor or rogue regime watching was crystal clear: you don't get to poke the bear and walk away. The U.S. Navy had demonstrated that even in unconventional scenarios, where the enemy doesn't fly a flag or wear a uniform, the reach and response of American power is uncompromising. The aircraft carrier remains the undisputed symbol of dominance, mobility, and deterrence in international affairs. And any attempt to challenge that authority, whether by rogue states or criminal syndicates, will be met with swift and devastating consequences. Back aboard the Gerald R. Ford, the crew returned to their operational tempo, undeterred and even more resolute. The incident became a case study in naval academies and defense circles around the world, a real-world example of hybrid warfare, deterrence, and rapid retaliation. And as the massive hull of the carrier cut to the sea under the rising sun, flanked by its battle group and protected from the skies by the nation's most advanced aircraft, it was a reminder to all watching: the might of the U.S. Navy isn't just in its firepower. It's in its readiness, precision, and unwavering commitment to defend the homeland and its interests abroad. No matter the enemy, no matter the tactic, America answers back. And when it does, the world watches.